Today we're going to be talking Ashes of Creation. They just released some new combat updates. Okay, whew, let's hop in. They got some new logo animations. Alpha 2 basic melee weapon attack update.
Hello everyone and welcome to another live stream day for Ashes of Creation. Super
We're just
excited
jumping
to be
right
with
in.
everybody today. We have a pretty awesome showcase.
Wait a second, holy cow. I just need to take a moment here. This is the first boat that we've seen, which is a big deal because there's going to be lots and lots of water content.
What you're about to see is not the final combat in Ashes. This is a portion of the combat systems. The combat you're going to see today is very focused on basic melee weapon attacks in addition to our floating text UI.
So we're just looking at the wacky boys where they're just hitting someone with a sword.
This is the Riverlands biome. I'm just going to start kind of walking down in this area. If you guys want to talk defining good combat for Ashes of Creation.
I would say, it starts with, all of the hundreds of thousands of hours, cumulative hours of MMO we have under our belt, right? We just got to push a couple buttons and we're immediately like, oh, it feels good or it doesn't feel good.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
We study it. We form hypotheses about what exactly it is that makes things feel good or not feel good. And then we make those things in as controlled a manner as we can. We tweak things, we see what feels good, what doesn't feel good. We come up with some rules, some processes, and then we put them to the test. And this is what comes out.
Dude, the rock monster was awesome. It's weird, like, it's fluid, but there's like a glitch where it hits and then it speeds through it. So I think what it is it's the wind-up is slow, and then it goes through so fast. It's like a rubber band being shot. It's got this like long wind-up and then...
that we think makes good combat and answered them one at a time.
One of the things I've not necessarily liked about MMOs traditionally in the past is that every portion of land is covered by some type of monster, right? And it kind of gives you this weird feel. But here, like, this is a very dangerous area that we're in, the environment. And part of it gets communicated by the, aspect of these rocks and the specific types of materials that's represented here. But you don't know exactly where the threat lies, per se, right? You kind of move up into an area, and if you move too far, you get the audio cue of the monsters rising. Your character gets into the combat stance. They have some really cool aspects of...
And the rocks roll out to you. I totally agree with what he's saying. This is freaking awesome. The monsters are amazing. I mean, there's like rock golems in almost every MMORPG. These are like by far my favorite. They have like personality. They build themselves, and when they die, they fall apart.
The animation team did an amazing job with the rolls here.
Yeah.
I am loving, and also they're like just like swinging away and then flying off.
How do you guys feel about the yellow, sort of like a lightsaber swoosh as you're like swinging your sword? It feels kind of, I don't know if I like it. It's too much. I feel like it could be toned down just a little bit. I like how they blend in. They just look like above rocks.
You were talking about how you like how heavy the sword feels, and that weight.
Do you guys agree? Like, it's almost too fast. The sword's here, and then literally the next second, it's already gone through. Like, look at this.
Impact.
I feel like it has a good drawback. It looks like really snappy.
My litmus test for agency in combat is take any moment in combat, pause time, look down at your hands, look at the keyboard. The buttons that you're pressing should be the directions that your character is moving.
Oh, wow.
So with these weapons, even though there are little bits of root motion here or there, they're always respecting your WASD input, and I think that's what makes them feel good.
I'm following what they're saying. There's a lot of thought that's gone into this, and this is so much better than the way it was. The way it was before is you'd get locked in. It almost had sort of like a New World type of feeling where you'd really get locked into like your swings and your actions, and you just didn't have as much control over your character. But this does feel so much better. There's a couple things that I don't know what my opinion is yet. How flashy every swing has like a light beam behind it, which I don't know how much I love. Maybe that's just like the weapon he's using. With like a huge sword like this, it feels like it's going too fast. This is a two-handed great sword. You also have to take into consideration that I think different weapons are going to have different attack speeds, right? So maybe they haven't really like thought about the attack speed. We're just looking at the animations and how it's all flowing. Maybe they're picking high attack speed to really get a sense of that. Other great swords, they'll be like slower but do more damage, or so we have to take all this with a grain of salt. So far, huge improvements. I want to say that I really like it.
Now I've equipped these dual daggers. Talk to me a little bit about the differences between the heavier weapon group and the light weapon
Let's
group.
see.
Initially, in our investigation, we wanted to start with the light weapons to figure out how to really blend the weight of an attack. We figured the least risky weapon to start with would be the lightest weapon possible. You know, little daggers move very fast, very high player agency, and not necessarily focus on big weight.
Okay, it's pretty cool, man. I feel like this is what an end character would look like. He's looking really cool. And these are just auto attacks. This feels really nice. It's really fast. I mean, I don't mind that sort of fast pace. I just don't want fast attacks that do nothing. I'd rather have a little bit slower attacks that have a little bit more behind them. So it doesn't look like there's really a knockback. The characters do move or like are affected every time they're hit, but it's not stopping their animation.
But one of the things that makes the daggers different than the sword is that the daggers never really slow you down. They're both respecting your directions, but the swords will actually slow you down at certain times, like leading up into the strike, your split body blending down towards 0.
Yeah, they attack so fast. I think that's why they're putting in like these swooshes.
And then you strike, and then it blends back up toward to 1. Daggers are not doing any blending like that. You're just split body, and then you're striking, and then you're back into split body.
This sort of like overlaid animation is pretty cool though.
Yeah, I'm just playing
how
with
they
the
did that.
directionals here. I mean, on the animation team, they did a phenomenal job. I'm loving the kind of foot placement and movement. It feels really good to play.
Oh yeah, considering how physically based we are and animation driven our combat system is, it was super important that the animators, get all of that right, and they absolutely knocked it out of the park.
Okay, after watching it right here where they're not attacking enemies, I really like this. I don't think it's too fast or snappy. I can see how you're still moving with your character, but it slows you down as you're like leaning in with the weapon. All of a sudden this clicks and this makes way more sense. Before, when I was looking at it with the monsters, I don't know if there was just so much going on and I was taking in so much, but this feels good. Yeah, like he swings and then like he's a little bit slow as he's like picking up the sword again, but once he gets it back up, he's back to full speed.
The animation team definitely had to take a deep breath when we went to them like, hey, those 3-part weapon combos that we like so much? We want different ones for each direction that you can move in. Oh, and also you need to be able to weave between the directionals at any time.
It feels good. It feels a lot better.
One of the things that's interesting and is always a point of contention for those of us who have perhaps played different games and have become accustomed to specific visual representation of these damage floating text, right? And I want to showcase a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to let them hit on me for a little bit just so you can kind of see directionally damage you take, which is
I'm only seeing like these guys hits,
indicated
right?
in this red number, floats towards your left hand side, and when you do damage to a target, they float to your right hand side. Now, one of the very important aspects of these floating texts is providing the player with customization options that they can adjust the size of the floating text, they can adjust the color composition on how these texts are represented. They can also include damage icons to indicate the ability that's used for those floating text, and importantly, call out the crits that you do in a separate way, how they pop in. They're slightly above the other numbers.
This is such a huge deal. This is what makes it feel good, is when you're like fighting 5 enemies like he's about to do, and you just see the numbers pop, 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 and then bam, huge crit number right across the top. Like, it feels good. This is one of the best parts about MMOs. It's the interaction with your damage numbers. I've never seen an MMO who's done that, let you customize how your damage numbers. It's never default in the game, so I love this. Okay, the more I'm watching this, the more and more I'm liking this combat. It's got a good crunch to it, especially with this big sword, how it sinks in the ground or sinks in the target.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so you see the color is changing now.
Yeah.
And that's something that the player has agency over, right? You can assign different types of colors.
Oh, did you see that huge crit there for a second? Look at this big crit, 1,000.
Something that the player has agency over, right? You can
Wham.
assign different types of colors. that you want.
Feels good.
You can see that size now is larger. You can showcase XP if you want. You can bold it.
I wonder if you can like change the size of the numbers based on like how high the numbers are. So like if you're doing like a whole bunch of 5 damage, they're all like really small, but then it gets bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden crit, wham, covers your whole screen.
Player customization options for these floating text, I think, is super important.
Well, I think we've sort of defined our spectrum with the light and the heavy when it comes to agency versus weight versus impact.
Okay, so they're talking about light and heavy. I don't think you can do a heavy attack. I think I got confused there for a second. It just depends on the weapon. So like every auto attack is weighted the same, even though he's swinging in different directions.
When you look at
Am I wrong about that?
I think we're close to saying that this is sort of the most we want to compromise agency for weight and impact. And once we have that upper bound, we can sort of play with all of the different intermediate points, right, as we start to build out other weapons. But we have interesting explorations as well in how all of this translates into ranged. We might take the limiters off for ultimates and just see what the coolest things we can make are.
Another component, by the way, of defining weapon attacks is also the visual effects side. Weapon trailings, the intensity of those weapon trailings, how they scale based on the type of weapon, the level of weapon that you have, not just the trailing on the weapon per se, but also the ground decals. Like for this heavy weapon, that first strike, you see that decal in the ground is. It's cool. I love that look. And even on the backswing, when I hit the ground behind me,
it is really cool how it affects the ground. Like it's so heavy, it like sinks in the ground.
Something that may not be seen in other MMOs. So we really wanted to make a big focus on that. And
another thing that's really important, I think, is the audio component. And Kat has done a phenomenal job.
I was just talking about the sound design. There's a good crunch. The sound makes it nice. It adds that like little bit of icing on the top
for creatures as well as for the weapon. And actually, it's all part of what makes combat feel good. Is also the
sound effects, right? It's a super important part, as you said, of the package in order to sell that weight and that immersion in the game.
He does look pretty dang cool.
The word of the day has been impact and weight, and a lot of that is sold through what the player sees. You know, we didn't want anything to be nauseating or over the top. And, you know, certainly people can adjust it in option settings. So we wanted something that would sell a lot of the weight without, you know, being too over the top and too sort of cartoonish. And so we implemented a few different camera effects, you know, things like camera shake, radio blur, and a few other things involved, and really tried to maximize, you know, our bang for the buck with those to sell.
You know, I didn't even notice that. So I feel like that's perfect. That's the sweet spot, right? Where it's impacting me and like how I feel about it, but I don't notice it. Like now that they showed those couple abilities and I was just looking at how the screen reacted, it's perfect.
The weight of these attacks, and it really adds a lot, especially
like look at this
for me as a player. So that's something we've been focusing on, and it's made huge improvements to the feeling of these attacks.
That's really impressive. Like that's a level of detail I wouldn't have thought about, but it's true. It really makes a difference. Like sort of this sound blast, like a ripple through the air on like big smash attacks and stuff. That's awesome. I love that he just takes his sword, chops his arm off. The guy's arm just falls, and the other one falls, and his head falls. The animation is so good. So here's like sort of my philosophy around combat in MMORPGs. I love the idea of like developing a character, getting better gear, adventuring, exploring. The combat is part of all of those systems. So while like I don't particularly care about the combat, subconsciously it affects all of the systems, and that's why it's important to me. And I know like a lot of other people, they play MMORPGs for the combat. I love raiding, the adventure of raiding and working with a team to accomplish something huge like a raid. This is huge improvements. From what I see, I would really like this. I think I would need to get my hands on it to get more specific about my critique. The greatsword seemed a little flashy with like the yellow arc. I think that could be toned down a little bit. The daggers were a little bit better. Like it wasn't a light flash. It was more just like a blur behind it. The attacks seem faster than what I'm used to, but maybe that's because I'm coming from like World of Warcraft where it's not as fast as like those daggers were. It just was a blur, right? And it looked so cool. And so I want to try it out and see how I feel about it. But yeah, I think the number one thing that will make or break Ashes of Creation as a whole is probably how fun the combat and the world is. I mean, let's be honest, it's going to be $1 million things all working together to determine its success. The thing that I am really interested in, I knew they were going to get the combat to a point where I was like, okay, like it's good enough. I think this is way above and beyond that point. The next thing that I'm really going to be looking for is systems. How is the crafting collections? I love collecting mounts, collecting recipes, collecting different achievements in MMORPGs. I really hope they nail the systems around that core and like the loot system, the progress that they've been making so far. I have just the right amount of hopium that this will turn out to be okay. I mean, we're just in desperate need of something good. And every time I watch one of these updates, I'm reminded of how much the community is involved in this project. And I think things are going in the right direction, which like blows my mind. We'll be playing Alpha 2 when it comes out. So if you like this content, feel free to subscribe or follow me on Twitch. As always, break a leg.